A mother, a daughter, a dinner table. What started with baked chicken and small talk ended with 2 gunshots and a dead body in the dining room. The only thing more disturbing than the murder is what the daughter said right before her mother pulled the trigger. 4 words, that's all it took. And when the autopsy came back, the whole community turned on the mother they once praised. You're about to find out why, but I'll warn you now. This one will leave you choosing sides. For 7 years, nobody in East Point, Georgia, saw or heard from Zariah Coleman. Not a phone call, not a birthday message, not even a rumor. Esther Coleman, her mother, told anyone who asked that Zariah was off finding herself. But people weren't stupid. They knew something was broken. You don't just disappear from your mother's life, from the entire grid, unless there's a wound somewhere too deep to speak on. Zariah had been the kind of teenager that made older women jealous. Sharp cheekbones, sharper wit, and a future too bright for a town like East Point. People expected greatness, scholarships, speeches, something big. But instead, she graduated quietly and vanished even quieter. No college photos, no wedding, no funeral, just air. And all Esther ever gave was silence in return. If anyone brought her up, Esther would stiffen, smile, and change the subject to the weather. That's how folks in town knew whatever happened between mother and daughter, it wasn't small. So when Zariah showed up on a Sunday afternoon in mid-October, dragging a suitcase down Laurel Avenue like she'd never left, it didn't just turn heads, it flipped stomachs. She wasn't dressed like the old Zariah. There was a slowness in her walk, a confidence that didn't beg to be liked. Her heels hit the pavement like punctuation marks. Her hair was slicked back into a bun too neat for casual travel. And the sunglasses? Oversized and unnecessary for the shade she was throwing just by existing. People watched from porches. Cars slowed down. One old neighbor almost dropped her broom. Zariah didn't wave, didn't smile. She walked straight up to that house, the one with the white columns and the perfectly trimmed hedge, and knocked like she paid the mortgage there. No hesitation, no warning. Inside that house, Esther was fixing a vase. Gavin, her boyfriend, was pouring tea. Neither of them was ready. By the time Zariah resurfaced, Esther Coleman had already rewritten the script of her life. Gone was the stern-faced school principal with a temper and too many unspoken regrets. In her place stood a polished, respected woman, known for her soft-spoken faith, pressed Sunday outfits, and the fresh smile she wore like a mask to church. People in East Point, Georgia, saw her as a woman who'd survived heartbreak, divorce, and a rebellious daughter, and somehow still managed to glow with grace. But the truth? Esther didn't survive all that. She just buried it deep enough to keep her hands clean. She had worked hard to become someone new, someone people admired. She joined civic groups, hosted women's fellowships, even started dating again. A quiet, respectable man named Gavin Pierce, who came with clean fingernails, a calm voice, and a construction company that printed his name on polos. To Esther, Gavin was more than a boyfriend. He was her evidence, proof that she had moved on, that God had honored her patience, that she could still win after losing a child to the streets. What no one knew was how much of that image was built on control. Esther didn't clean up her life. She edited it, erased entire chapters, especially the ones with Zariah in them. It was easier that way, to speak of her daughter like she had gone astray, like she had taken a path that no mother could follow. It gave Esther room to breathe. It gave her permission to pretend she hadn't failed. But when Zariah walked through that door again, everything Esther had staged began to flicker. Zariah didn't look lost. She didn't look like someone begging to come back. She looked comfortable, like she'd outgrown this house, this town, and maybe even her mother. And that confidence, that presence, Esther hated it. So Esther did what she always did. She smiled. She served tea. She acted like the return of her only child was a blessing, not a threat. But in her chest, something was tightening. Rage? Guilt? Maybe both. All she knew was this: Zariah couldn't stay. Not like this. Not walking around like she was untouchable. Not with that tone, that lipstick, that silence. Because in Esther's world, there were two kinds of women: those who were seen as wives, and those who were whispered about after church. And if Zariah had become the latter? Then Esther had one job: to shut her down before the whispering started. Gavin Pierce was a man women prayed for. Mid-40s, no kids, clean-shaven with enough salt in his beard to suggest wisdom, and hands calloused just enough to make a woman feel protected. He ran a private contracting business that stayed booked year-round, mostly bathroom remodels and property flips for church folks and retirees. The kind of man who fixed your porch and said, "Yes, ma'am," to your grandmother. Respectful, steady, quiet. To Esther, he was something else entirely. He wasn't just a boyfriend. He was a lifeline, a second act, a chance to be chosen again. After a brutal divorce, a runaway daughter, and years of carrying shame like perfume. Gavin was her reward, and he played the role perfectly. Sunday morning kisses, afternoon errands. He didn't just fit into her life, he elevated it. He made Esther look soft again, desirable, normal. So when she reintroduced Zariah back into her life, it was Gavin she leaned on. Gavin listened like a man trained in emotional emergencies. He rubbed her shoulder. He said all the right things. Let her speak. Let her heal. Maybe this is the moment you've prayed for. Esther wanted to believe that. But something about Zariah's return made her skin crawl. And she wasn't sure if it was fear or intuition. The first time Zariah and Gavin locked eyes, it was in the living room. She had just come down from the guest room, wearing one of her mother's old robes. Gavin had come by to drop off groceries. Esther was in the backyard, on the phone. It was just them. Silence. A strange, lingering glance. Not sexual, not awkward, just tense. Zariah tilted her head and gave him a small smile. "So you're the man," she said, barely above a whisper. Gavin smiled back. "Guess I am." They didn't say anything else. They didn't need to. Whatever passed between them in that moment, it wasn't obvious, not to anyone watching. But if someone had been in that room, they would have felt it. The tension. Like two people playing poker with mirrored hands. Because Gavin knew something Esther didn't. He'd seen Zariah before, many times, in different rooms, under a different name. Wearing less, saying less, charging more. But in those hotel rooms, she was Rhea. There was no backstory, no family, no rules, just business and blurred lines. She was his escape before Esther became his comfort. And now? They were in the same house, with the same woman calling them both family. Zariah had clocked him the second she saw his face. And Gavin, well, Gavin did what men like him do. He stayed calm, smiled through the horror, prayed no one connected the dots. Because if Esther ever found out the truth, it wouldn't just be Zariah in danger. It'd be all three of them. In East Point, Sunday dinners weren't just meals. They were performances. The tablecloth was your stage. The roast chicken was your reputation. And the guests? They weren't just fed. They were impressed. Esther knew this better than anyone. It's how she'd survived the whispers after her divorce, how she maintained her place in the social pecking order, and now, how she'd prove, once and for all, that her life was still picture perfect. So she planned the dinner like it was a press conference. Lemon-glazed chicken, cornbread, sweet peas with smoked turkey neck, deviled eggs. No store-bought shortcuts. Gavin was asked to dress in navy, not black. Looks less formal, more settled. The centerpiece was fresh hydrangeas from Sister Loretta's garden. Gospel played low in the background. Not too loud, just enough to suggest peace lived in that home. Esther didn't want chaos, she wanted choreography. But what she didn't know was that Zariah had already read the script and planned to set it on fire. When the text came, "Dinner Sunday at 3. Bring your appetite." Zariah didn't blink. She said yes immediately. Not because she missed family, not because she needed closure, but because she wanted the room, the table, the audience. She wanted the perfect moment to say what needed to be said. And she knew her mother would make sure the setting was just right. She showed up wearing beige, modest but bold. Nothing too tight, but definitely not humble. Hair pinned up, nails done, skin glowing like someone who slept too well. The kind of glow that made old women nervous. She didn't bring a dish. She didn't bring a gift. Just herself. And silence. Gavin answered the door. He didn't say much, just nodded and stepped aside. Zariah brushed past him like they'd never met. But her eyes said, "I dare you to speak first." Gavin didn't. He just adjusted his collar and walked back to the kitchen, sweat already forming behind his ears. Esther greeted her like a camera was rolling. "You look rested," she said, voice tight behind a smile. Zariah responded with the kind of hug that doesn't really connect, just shoulders brushing and arms pretending. The air was too still. Something was hanging there. Something nobody wanted to say out loud. Dinner began like any other, blessing over the food. Gavin chewing too slow. Esther over-explaining every dish. Zariah stayed quiet, watching, listening, measuring the timing. This wasn't just about eating. This was war served on china plates. Because while Esther was showing off her man, her kitchen, and her control, Zariah was counting down the minutes. She didn't come to be saved. She didn't come to make peace. She came to return the favor. And she brought the bomb in her mouth. They were on their second round of sweet tea when the fork clinked against the edge of Zariah's plate. Software deliberate. The kind of sound that makes a room go still, even when no one knows why. Esther was mid-sentence, bragging about the new scripture journal her women's group was releasing. Gavin was nodding along, pushing green beans across his plate, barely tasting anything. The air had shifted, not dramatically, just enough to be felt. Like a power outage that hadn't happened yet, but everyone senses it coming. And then she spoke. No build-up, no hint, just the quiet kind of line that's dropped so casually, so fatally, it doesn't register at first. "He's my best client." The silence was instant. Not confused silence, not awkward silence. Collision silence. The kind where sound doesn't return for a while. Esther blinked. Once, twice. She didn't ask her to repeat it. She just looked at her man, and saw everything she needed to see in how he avoided her gaze. Gavin didn't speak. His eyes dropped to the table. His hands froze mid-reach. He didn't deny it. He didn't question it. He just sat there. Zariah leaned back, folded her napkin neatly, and placed it by her plate, like a woman who had finished her business. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The words had already landed. Her silence now was louder than anything she could say. Esther stood up so slowly it felt like time was dragging its feet. Her face didn't twist. She didn't scream. She didn't ask who or how long or why. She just turned, walked out the dining room, down the hallway, opened the drawer in her bedroom dresser, and came back with a silver Glock 43. Zariah didn't move. Gavin did, but too late. Esther raised the gun. No shaking, no hesitation, just 2 shots, one to the chest, one to the neck. Zariah dropped backward, plate crashing off the table. Gavin stumbled up, yelling her name, but the sound didn't match the moment. It came out panicked, late, useless. Esther stood still, gun still in hand, breathing steady. Eyes locked on the body like it hadn't quite registered. No one spoke. Because what do you say when Sunday dinner ends with a daughter dead on the floor and a mother holding the gun? The 4 words were still echoing in the air, refusing to die with her. Esther didn't cry. Not when the body hit the hardwood. Not when Gavin shouted her name. Not even when the sirens started echoing down Laurel Avenue. She just placed the gun on the linen runner beside the centerpiece, straightened the hydrangeas, and walked into the kitchen like she was tidying up after company. The food was still warm. Zariah's blood wasn't. By the time the first officer stepped through the door, Esther had already slipped into a robe and sat herself neatly on the living room couch with the cordless phone in her hand. Calm, controlled, just like always. "I shot her," she said before they even asked. "She attacked me. I feared for my life." That's what she told them, over and over. The words came out like scripture, memorized, rehearsed, ironed clean of emotion. But the scene didn't back her up. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned chairs, no scratches, no bruises on her. The only one with trauma was the woman lying face up in a floral dress, blood soaking into Esther's Persian rug, with both wounds center mass, not warning shots, not accidental misfires. The coroner didn't say much at first, but one look at the wound trajectory, and he made a note. Too precise for panic. Meanwhile, Gavin? Gone. He slipped out the back before the sirens ever pulled up. No goodbye, no explanation. Just vanished into the night with his car keys and his cowardice. Left Esther to explain everything, even what he could have confirmed or denied. But maybe Gavin knew better. Maybe he knew that staying would mean questions, fingerprints, headlines. Maybe he knew that silence was safer than loyalty. Investigators noted the distance between the plates and the body. They measured angles, logged the untouched wine glasses, photographed the cloth napkin still folded beside Zariah's plate. Too clean? Too staged? One officer looked at the scene and muttered, "No way this was heat of the moment." Another said, "She didn't shoot to protect herself. She shot to finish something." And neighbors? Oh, they were already talking. Someone had heard voices, not shouting, but low arguing, around 3:30. Another said they saw Gavin pacing near his truck 20 minutes before the cops came. And someone from 2 houses down claimed they heard one gunshot, then a pause, then another. Esther's story was tight. Too tight. Almost like a woman who had more time to prepare than she admitted. But even she couldn't control the blood splatter, the bruising, the look in her dead daughter's eyes. Zariah didn't die fighting. She died knowing who pulled the trigger, and why. They opened her body 3 days after the shooting. Cold metal tables, bright fluorescent lights, the kind of silence that swallows dignity. Zariah's body arrived tagged and zipped, but what the coroner unzipped wasn't just skin, it was truth. And truth doesn't lie. Not under a microscope, not when blood is tested, not when a uterus is examined. The report came back with 2 words that silenced every person in the lab. 6 weeks. Zariah Coleman had been pregnant. And not just recently. The timeline was clear. Whatever was growing inside her had been there long enough to confirm intent. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a last-minute mistake. Someone had been sleeping with her regularly. Someone who now had a reason to keep quiet. They ran the DNA before the ink even dried on the death certificate. And when the results came in, it tore the mask off everything. The father was Gavin Pierce. Church group chats lit up like wildfire. Barbershop debates turned into near brawls. Aunties who'd once clapped for Esther during Sunday service suddenly weren't picking up her calls. Because now, it wasn't just murder. It wasn't just scandal. It was a triangle so foul, so personal, it made people question who they were really sitting next to in church. A mother, a daughter, a boyfriend, and a baby that would have made one man, both a stepfather and a father. People took sides fast. Some blamed Zariah. She was grown. She knew what she was doing. You don't lay down with your mama's man and think it won't cost you. Others blamed Gavin. A man that age messing with a girl young enough to be his child? That's not just messy, it's manipulative. But the loudest voices aimed their fire at Esther. Shot her own pregnant daughter? That ain't discipline, that's murder. She always been about image. Now look, killed her blood to save her pride. The trial started with heavy security. Esther sat with her hair pressed, face blank, hands folded like a statue carved out of shame and rage. Her lawyer stuck with the original story. Self-defense, temporary mental break, overwhelming betrayal. But the prosecution had the autopsy report. They had Zariah's OB/GYN appointment records. And most damning of all, they had the paternity match. Whatever moral ground Esther thought she stood on crumbled with one document. You don't get to claim a moment of weakness when you put 2 bullets in a woman carrying your grandchild. And Gavin? Still missing. Now with a warrant hanging over his head and the title of key to the case. But at that point, nobody cared if he ever showed up again. Because the only thing more chilling than his absence was the silence in that courtroom when the words "confirmed pregnancy" were read aloud. And all eyes turned to Esther, not as a grieving mother, but as a killer who knew what she was doing. They found Gavin's body in a motel just outside Macon. Room 208. Curtains drawn. Wallet missing. Gunshot wound to the head. No note. He'd checked in under a fake name 2 nights earlier. Surveillance caught him alone. No visitors. Just a paper bag of takeout, a bottle of liquor, and a man pacing in circles like the truth was closing in on him from every wall. When the cleaning lady opened the door, the first thing she saw was blood. The second? An open laptop, still playing a YouTube sermon on forgiveness. The moment news hit that Gavin Pierce was dead, the entire case cracked wide open again. Some called it suicide. Others screamed cover-up. A few even whispered revenge? Said maybe Gavin's wife had found out everything and handled it off record. But no one could prove a thing. Just like Zariah's death, this one came without closure. Just questions and a sick feeling that justice, if it ever existed, wasn't landing in the right hands. Inside the courtroom, Esther didn't flinch when she heard the news. She didn't shed a tear, didn't ask for a break, just sat there with her spine straight and her mouth shut, like mourning was beneath her. Her attorney pivoted hard, went full insanity plea, claimed disassociation, emotional hijack, loss of cognitive reasoning. He painted her as a God-fearing woman pushed beyond her limit, betrayed by the man she trusted and the child she birthed. But the jury didn't buy it. The autopsy, the gunshots, the pregnancy. It was too much. Too clean. Too deliberate. You don't shoot someone in the chest and neck, sit down and call 911, and then claim you blacked out. Verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Sentence: 30 years without parole. The courtroom didn't cheer. It didn't gasp. It just exhaled. Like everyone had been holding their breath since the moment Zariah said those 4 words. But even with justice handed down, nobody felt whole. Because the question that kept haunting the city wasn't who killed who. That was settled. It was, who really destroyed this family first? Was it Zariah for sleeping with the man her mother loved? Or was she just the mirror reflecting everything Esther pretended not to be? Was she a villain? Or just the evidence? One woman killed her child. One man ran from the mess he created. And one daughter, full of fire, secrets, and defiance, died with truth on her lips and a life inside her womb that would never be born. In the end, all 3 of them played a part in the fire. But only one lit the match. And she'll die in prison knowing exactly why she pulled the trigger.